In this video, I'm going to show you how to cut slots for rockers using my stretcher jig, as well as a handy table saw jig to actually cut the slots into the legs. While this process utilizes the two jigs I mentioned, it's more of a technique than anything, and it's very similar to using my stretcher jig to do a box stretcher undercarriage on a chair. The beauty of this technique is that it allows you to take the legs out of the chair to cut the slots, and then once the slots are cut, you put the legs back in the chair. The rockers run from the front leg to the back leg, locking those legs into place as you drill the mortises for the stretchers. The main issue in cutting these slots in the legs is to adjust for the different splay. As you can see here, the front leg is splayed out a little less than the back leg. In fact, the front leg is at 12 degrees of splay and the back leg is at 15 degrees of splay, or a difference of 3 degrees. So how do we address that? The way we compensate for this difference of 3 degrees between the front leg and the back leg is to actually angle our slot slightly. So the difference here is, like we said, 3 degrees. So the average of that is 1.5 degrees. And that is actually what we're going to set our dado blade on our table saw to. We're going to actually tilt that dado blade 1.5 degrees. Okay, here you can see the slots cut between the front and the back leg, and you can see that the slot in the front leg is angled slightly in one direction, and the slot in the back leg is angled slightly in the other direction. Since they're both angled at 1.5 degrees opposing each other, that cancels out the difference of splay in 3 degrees and makes sure our slot is coplanar. Before we actually cut the slots, let's talk about the jig for the table saw. Now, if you're interested in my stretcher jig, there's plenty of information on my YouTube channel or on my IGTV feed. So the jig here for the table saw is very simple. It's basically a fence and a couple of V-notches. Now, the lower V-notch is fixed to the fence. I just use some CA glue to glue it to the fence, and it's placed 1 inch above the bed of the table saw. There's a little shelf there to the left, or as you're looking at it, to the right, and that helps hold a shim. That basically two opposing shims are used to adjust the upper V-notch. Here you can see how that shim is glued onto the back of the upper V-notch. And here you can see the jig all assembled. You can see that the upper V-notch rides on the bottom V-notch, and it's just free floating there, just adjusted by the shims. It will automatically lock on to the round leg. And you can see the shelf there helps hold that other piece of shim, and that easily adjust that upper V-notch in and out to conform to the leg, whether that leg is either tapering or expanding, depending on what type of leg you have in there. And then it's real easy to put a clamp on the leg, and it secures directly against those shims and the back of the fence. In this photo, I want to pay particular attention to that upper V-notch. You know, a portion of it is cut away, and that's so that both the upper V-notch and the lower V-notch only touch the leg at 2 points. That makes for easier clamping and easier adjustability. In order to center the jig on your dado blade, take a rule and put it on the side of your dado blade and use a 1/4 inch setup block to mark the center of the blade. Make sure you do this on both sides of the blade to ensure that you have accurately marked the center of the dado blade. In this case, I'm cutting a 1/2 inch slot, so the dado blade is set up for a 1/2 inch cut. By using an engineer square centered on the marks of our table saw insert, I can accurately center the jig to the center of our dado stack. As you can see, I have deliberately overcut this V-notch to have a little peak there at the bottom, and that peak allows me to easily transition the center of the V-notch down to the center of the marks we made on our blade insert. The rule that the engineer square is sitting on is just there to keep the engineer square from falling into the gap for the dado blade. We're now ready to mark the legs to cut the rocker slots. The first thing we need to do is determine which face of each leg needs to run through the dado blade. And this is done because we need to compensate for that 3-degree difference in splay. So here I've marked the outside of the right pair of legs, so the outside face of the front leg and the outside face of the back leg. Those are going to be facing the dado blade when we make the cut. The other pair of legs is going to be just the opposite. I'm going to mark the inside face of each of those. And the way I'm marking this is just a piece of blue tape with a F laid on there, and the F in my case just stands for front. So that front part needs to face the dado blade as it's run through. So by doing this, this will then compensate for that 3-degree difference in splay because we're running the legs 180 degrees opposite of each other, and our blade is tilted at 1.5 degrees. Hopefully that makes some sense. Next, I need to mark where the rocker slots will go through the legs, and I'm using this thingamajig, technical term, to mark where the rocker slot will go through the center of the front leg and the center of the rear leg. I will then transfer that mark to the face that's going to go through the dado blade, in other words, the one with the blue tape with the F marked on it. To be honest, this really isn't that necessary since the table saw jig will self-center the legs. However, this will help keep the correct orientation of the grain. In other words, the grain of the legs at the correct orientation to the grain of the seat. We can now cut these slots in the legs. You simply put the leg into your bottom V-notch, and then you can adjust the top V-notch with the shims to where the leg is sitting perfectly at 90 degrees to the table saw blade. Make sure the leg is oriented in the correct direction and that the mark that you made is aligned with the mark on the table saw insert. Then simply clamp the leg into the jig using a clamp. You can use a piece of hard felt or other type material taped to the face of your clamp to kind of conform to the leg and hold it more securely in place. I've also put blue tape on the back side of the cut to help prevent any tear out, and this has been very beneficial when cutting these slots. You can also ensure that the leg is into the jig at 90 degrees by marking a center line down your leg and using a laser to then verify that the leg is positioned in there at 90 degrees to the table saw. However, if you've cut the end of your leg square, this shouldn't be necessary. And here we are cutting the slot into the leg. This is actually a test leg because I forgot to film when I was actually cutting the legs for the slot. So this is a test piece I'm running through there just so you can see the operation. It's relatively uneventful. And then once we do that, we can take it out of the jig. And you can see the F there that marks the face that is towards the dado blade when making the cut. Okay, here we are using the stretcher jig to, in this case, re-drill the mortises in the legs. I'd previously drilled mortises in the legs before I came up with this technique, and I had to plug them. And as you can see, it's not exactly easy drilling into end-grain plugs, but everything went well. So you can see here that the rocker really does lock the legs into the correct orientation. So it's a simple matter to drill the mortises. And like I said before, it's just like drilling a box stretcher for a normal chair. And once we get done with one side, it's just rinse and repeat on the other side. Again, that rocker is locking those legs into the correct orientation. And we just drill away, And if you want any more information on the stretcher jig, feel free to look at my IGTV videos or my YouTube channel. And there's a bunch of videos there about the stretcher jig and a couple of demos for H stretchers and even box stretchers. So here, after drilling the stretcher mortises, I'm putting some dummy stretchers in just here so you can see how we did. And the front ones are in, and now the back ones are. And let's put these rockers in to see how everything is just locked in to the correct orientation. So we're putting the rockers for the, I guess that would be the right side of the chair, depending on how you look at it. And this would be for the other side of the chair. And you can see, nice, tight, but slip fit. So now we're going to break out the levels here and show you how well the stretcher jig did. So you can see here that the stretcher is perfectly level with the bottom of the chair, both the front stretcher and the rear stretcher. And we'll finish this video with a couple of beauty shots with the stretchers actually installed. So if you have a question or comment, leave a comment below or DM me. And if you're interested in the stretcher jig, visit my Etsy store, K Barton Tools. Again, thanks for watching.